Leighton, Vice President of the Santa Monica Conservancy. I'd like to welcome you to the first of our 2002 Mosaic programs. Some of you are familiar with the Conservancy, but for those of you who are not, we are a nonprofit organization similar to the Los Angeles Conservancy or the National Trust for Historic Preservation, but much smaller. We focus our education and advocacy on Santa Monica and its immediate surroundings, encouraging historic preservation and adaptive reuse while celebrating our historic communities and their memories. This evening, we will explore the cultural history of the history and recreation murals of Santa Monica City Hall lobby. Our panel discussion will be followed by a question and answer period. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen to enter your questions as they come to you during our program. We'll begin our program within a moment, but first I'd like to introduce Adina Bernheimer, our Zoom administrator. Adina, who is usually backstage, will jump in and bail us out if we experience any technical problems during our program. Thank you, Adina.
You're welcome. Everybody enjoy the show.
With that, let the program begin. Our moderator, Conservancy member Ruth Ann Lehrer, is an architectural historian and a former Santa Monica Landmarks Commissioner. Ruth Ann, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Welcome everyone to an exploration of the historic murals in City Hall, and thank you so much for joining us for this important subject. People all over the nation are currently reassessing works of art that deal with social, cultural, and racial themes, and which don't reflect current concepts about racial equity and social justice. Our City Hall murals have been criticized for allegedly racially biased images, and those attacks have invited renewed attention to the artworks. We recognize that works of art can support divergent, even multiple interpretations, and welcome this moment to explore those ideas. City Council adopted two somewhat contradictory initiatives last May in response to the criticism. First, to install a screen to hide the Stanton MacDonald-Wright artworks from public view. Second, ask the Cultural Affairs Department to initiate a public engagement process, soliciting information and viewpoints from various interested parties, and harnessing those ideas to create new interpretive materials for the murals, as well as new works of art created by Indigenous artists and others. While the Conservancy opposes the censorship of these historic artworks with the proposed screens, we wholeheartedly embrace the recontextualization initiative and plan to participate. Today, we're putting the controversy over the mural screens to one side to focus our full attention on understanding the murals. We are so happy to have three outstanding speakers who will illuminate three important aspects of them. First, the artist, Stanton MacDonald-Wright, who created the murals. Then, the Gabrielino Tongva people reflected in the history mural. And finally, the story of the ranchos, and specifically Rancho Boca de Santa Monica. For those who have not been inside City Hall, here's a brief introduction. These are the pair of murals, very large scale, almost 2 stories, framing both sides of the entry door as seen from the lobby. One depicts the history of Santa Monica and the Bay District on the right. That's the artist's title, and the other, recreation. The artist's title, The History of Santa Monica and the Bay District, should be our first clue of his intention. Alongside the figurative images are text panels, which scroll through different stages in the evolution of the city. The history mural text starts with the Portola expedition of 1769, the first land-based exploration of California when Mexico was still part of the Spanish Empire. It ends with California becoming an American state in 1850. The recreation panel deals with the urban history of Santa Monica, beginning in 1875. The entirety of City Hall, its architecture and interior decor of decorative tiles and floors, plus the murals, is designated as a Santa Monica landmark as a work of WPA design, and the murals are specially identified in the designation as significant features. WPA, or Works Progress Administration, was a New Deal economic recovery program that resulted in many public construction projects and art in public places. We're concentrating on the history mural because of its complexity, but let's take a quick look at recreation. To many observers, it appears to celebrate elite white recreational activities: tennis, polo, race cars, airplanes, sailing. Why these images? I found the answer in an interview where the artist explained this mural and realized that these activities were selected because they were major spectator sports that attracted people to come to Santa Monica. Yes, there were racing car events on Wilshire Boulevard, and aviation had its recreational side. And our tennis players, particularly the females, were stars. The artist knew all about them by name. Remembering that City Hall and its murals were created as part of our economic recovery from the Depression, it's likely these activities were chosen reflecting pride in our city's uniqueness, which could boost local business and tourism. Now, let's get back to the history mural. When the Portola expedition ventured into Tongva territory in 1769, Spanish explorers were welcomed and gifts were exchanged. Father Crespi, whose journals recorded these encounters, often expressed admiration and pride for the indigenous culture. The mural shows the first encounter between the Europeans and the Native Americans at springs near here, at the village called Corovunga, which was described by Father Crespi. The European explorers are just arriving, as you can see by their striding feet. The indigenous people are fully absorbed with the waters of the springs, one drinking to indicate that these waters are pure and life-giving, the other one scooping the water, possibly as an offering to the new arrivals. Histories of Santa Monica describe the Corovunga Springs as the place where the city received its name, because their abundant waters reminded Franciscan monks of the tears that Saint Monica shed as she lamented for the bad behavior of her son Augustine. While the historical first encounter at the springs is recorded in the Crespi Journal, the naming story is not really attributed. Just who is responsible and when is somewhat fuzzy. It's possibly it happened on the Portola expedition's return trip to Santa Monica, and possibly on her name day. We do know for a fact that this water was the city's first water source, piped into a reservoir located at Douglas Park. The multiple time periods mentioned in the text panel are reflected in the imagery. The monk and the soldier allude to future unfolding stages of our history, the missions, the presidios, the ranches. And the figure in the middle ground on horseback is an image that references the Spanish and Mexican ranchos of the 19th century, the Californios of a later time period. And now let me introduce the first speaker to take you further into the murals. Art historian Will South is the foremost authority on Stanton MacDonald-Wright. He studied this artist with his Ph.D. dissertation and curated a museum exhibition on this artist's work, which traveled to several locations, including LACMA in 2001. He's written a definitive book on the artist. He will help us to understand MacDonald-Wright's place in the art world, as well as the WPA program that enabled City Hall to be built. And he's joining us from Columbia, South Carolina. Welcome, Will.
Thank you very much, Ruth Ann. And the first thing I'd like to do is to thank Ruth Ann for inviting me to join what I feel is a very, very important conversation about Stanton MacDonald-Wright. And talking about Stanton MacDonald-Wright is actually, frankly, my idea of having fun. So let's just jump right in and make a start. This is Stanton, a self-portrait painted around 1909, 1910. He's about 20 years old and a very serious painter already, very confident, very brash, very bold. He grows up in Santa Monica. His father ran a beachfront hotel if you can imagine a boy growing up in such a situation. The beach is right outside his door. The mountains are nearby. And there's this constant parade of eccentric characters going through the hotel all the time. As a young boy, as a young boy, Stanton gets in trouble at school. He's actually expelled once, and he runs away from home at least once. And he has an attraction to illegal things like cigarettes. So you can see from an early age, he was cut out to be an artist. And this is Stanton a little later in Paris. And you see that he has a monkey on his back. I wish I had a pointer for you all, but it's shoulder. He loved animals. He loved monkeys. He painted with them often. He loved dogs, and you can often see his beloved chow dogs in murals, Southern California murals. And he, make no mistake about it, was a brilliant guy. He gets to Paris, he learns how to speak French fluently, and he becomes famous as a very young guy. He has a partner in Paris named Morgan Russell, and he and Morgan Russell come up with a movement, an ism. Everybody had an ism in those days: Cubism, Futurism, Surrealism. But they are two Americans, so not all that welcome in France, okay, at the time. Like, Americans didn't know anything. They were just supposed to spend money. But Stanton and Morgan came up with the idea of synchromism, which means with color, the way symphony means with sound. And this movement is spectacular in how far advanced it was in terms of abstract painting. This is really a non-objective painting, which means there's no identifiable object in it, not a still life, not a figure, nothing. And this is circa 1912, 1913. So there are a lot of art historians, and I'm one of them, who believe that Stanton MacDonald-Wright was one of the first two, the other being Morgan Russell, one of the first two artists, period, to paint fully abstractly from America and in America. And that is really where his importance is going to lie historically, is that he contributed to the advancement of modernism internationally. They show these works in Munich in 1913 and then in Paris in 1913. So he is way, way ahead of the curve. Now, in synchromism, the idea is that you use color the same way you use notes on a piano or a musical scale. And so musical notes are separated by whole step, half step, etc. The musicians out there will know what I'm talking about. And so on a color wheel with 12 notes, the same way that a musical scale has 12, you do the same distancing and spaces, you come up with your scale, and you paint in it. And this is a great example of that, dating from around 1916. And the war, the First World War, interrupted everything the way wars do. So Stanton went from Paris to London, and he's hanging out in London for a while, but it's hard to be in London. And so he makes his way back to New York. And while he's in New York, he meets the famous art dealer, Alfred Stieglitz. And Stanton becomes part of the Stieglitz stable of artists. And these are the most important modernists in American art history. And Stieglitz gives him a show, even in 1917. And the show right after him is by Georgia O'Keeffe. And she saw all of Stanton's things, and she just thought, you know, this is music. And that's what she wrote. And she was just absolutely taken with him. And so he would influence lots of people in lots of ways. But in New York, he was starving, and he was in a cold water walk-up. So no heat at all in his building, lots of rats, lots of bugs. And he just, in 1918, he just thought, you know, I don't need this. I know a place where it's sunny all the time. And he goes back to California, 1918. And this is an example of his painting from that time. There wasn't an artist in Southern California that could touch him in terms of being modern and avant-garde. And Stanton speaks French. He's been to Munich, he's been to London, he's lived in New York. He met Picasso, he knows Matisse, and so he is a star locally. Now, Stanton thought that he and Morgan Russell were going to change the world, that they were the two greatest artists in the world. Now, have you ever met an artist who thought that he or she was the greatest in the world? There are plenty of them. And they were two of them. But now he thinks, okay, I didn't change the world overnight, but I'm going to change California. And maybe it'll take me a few years. That was optimistic, but he thought he would. And so right away when he gets back, he starts a modern art society. And he has the first show ever of modern art in California in 1920. And he just keeps barreling ahead. He takes over the Art Students League in the 1920s. This is an example of his painting by 1930. And this is a painting that's a personal favorite of mine. It depicts the actress Reza Royce. And her pose here is adapted specifically from Adam in the Sistine Chapel. And I want you to keep that in your mind, okay? Because we're going to refer to this later. He uses Adam as a kind of a deliberate visual, a double entendre, because in Asian philosophy, the life-giving force, the birth force, is the yin, right? Not the yang, it's the yin, and this is yin synchrony, and creation comes from woman. And so he inverts Michelangelo and the Sistine Chapel, and he gives us this, which I think is incredibly beautiful, the Santa Monica Hills in the background, but done as an Asian kind of landscape with its aerial descending perspective. And that inversion, I think he knew. Later art historians were going to pick up on these things and say, yes, you were great. 1934, we're in the Depression, we're deep into the Depression. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt is about to start the WPA. The first thing, though, is the PWPA. Don't get confused by this. And it's under this program that he does the Santa Monica Library murals in 1934. And this is an interior shot. And what Stanton decided to do was to paint the history of civilization, because he was just obsessed with history, with the fusion of East and West in the world, with the fusion of mysticism and rationalism, and that there's duality in everything he believed. He was steeped in Asian thinking. And those dualities, to be complete, have to meet. And so in the mural, one side is technology and the other side is art. And by the way, you see this caveman throwing the lasso, that's Thomas Hart Benton, who's poking a joke at his friend. But anyway, that's just an aside. So this mural, technology and art are going to come together. And how do they do it? In film. And Southern California is the capital of film already. And you see in the middle of this mural, Gloria Stewart. She was a Santa Monica native. She also, in later years, played the elderly woman in the Titanic. And when she was interviewed about Stanton MacDonald-Wright, she just said, "Who?" But he did paint her. And behind Gloria Stewart is Leo Carrillo and Leo Carrillo's father, Judge Carrillo. The Carrillos were among the oldest families living in Santa Monica. And Stanton MacDonald-Wright recognized that, respected that, and included them in the mural. These murals, by the way, the old library had to be torn down, and the city of Santa Monica, in its infinite wisdom, decided just to let the murals go. And the Smithsonian said they can't be destroyed, we'll take them. And they did. And then years later, the city of Santa Monica had to come back and say, we made a big mistake, as political people often do. Art historians do too, but with art, maybe less so. And so they finally get the murals back and they put them up in the new library, only now they're completely out of order. There is no division between the technology and the art coming together. So it's completely lost. Okay. Now we get to the murals that Ruth Ann has introduced so well. By now we're into the WPA, and within the WPA is the FAP, the Federal Art Project, and Stanton MacDonald-Wright is the head of the Federal Art Project. He's very aggressive, very can-do kind of guy, very articulate, he's brilliant, and he becomes the director. And as the director, he's going to take his obsessions with history and apply them to the murals that are done by anybody in Southern California. And he doesn't want them to be topical. He doesn't want them to be about today's headline. They have to be universal, and they have to, they have to endure through time. And the topic of his mural here really for him is how societies, how civilizations grow and how they change. And let's see if we can get a detail here. So as Ruth Ann has indicated, you have the Europeans entering here on the left and the Native Americans here to the other side of the mural on the right, and bisecting them is the water. The water is the star of the mural because it's water that makes life possible and makes civilizations possible. Think, the Tiber, and think of the Nile, and think of this water in Santa Monica. And so he foregrounds that, and he's very deliberate about this. And he studied mosaics, and he wrote about medieval mosaics. He wrote an art history book in 1932 that was never published, but he covers the entirety of world art: Africa, Asia, States, Europe, Oceanic, all of it. And he knows how murals are done, and he knows how they're supposed to be read. Murals were made for people in a time that could not read. And so you read a mural from left to right in chapters. And in this first chapter, the Europeans have just arrived and they're in motion. I mean, they've just gotten here and they're moving forward. And our father here, Crespi, his eyes are not on the Native Americans. They're looking out to what? The future. They're looking forward to the future. And our conquistador moves as if to check out the surroundings. Also indicates his head will turn back. It gives motion to the image. In the center, Ruth Ann and I have had a little back and forth on what does this figure mean? And I believe he is a witness to history. Something important is happening here, and it has to be observed, and it has to be recounted. It has to be remembered, and it will be us. And he looks out, not surprisingly, at us. And then two important figures are the Native Americans down in the lower right. And I'm going to go back for just a second and hope that you can see this. Probably not. But Stanton makes the bodies quite muscular, and the muscles are defined in the figures with striations, linear striations that define the biceps, triceps, so forth. Because these figures are heroic. I mean, he's following again Michelangelo and other artists. When you're telling an epic story, your figures are likewise heroic. And the pose of our Native American in the foreground is seated, cross-legged, both arms extended, and look at his palms. They're both turned upward. Now, this is just a thought, but Stanton and his obsession with all things Eastern, I think, might have been giving us another visual double entendre that this is a bodhisattva-like figure. This is the figure in the mural who meditates on what is happening, who understands nature. And the hands turned upward in Asian traditions is the receptive mode, okay? Receptive to. And a bodhisattva is the one who hears the suffering of the world. So I think that visual association with a heroic kind of bodhisattva figure, I'm not calling this figure a bodhisattva, let alone a Buddha, but he has the aspect, the physical aspect, the heroic body, the receptive hands, and the serene face. And so it's my favorite figure in the mural. So let's go forward again. And the Native American just behind him is drinking water. And as Ruth Ann noted, they are celebrating the water. They are focused on the water, that it's nourishing, it's life-giving. And so from the meditative pose and the calm and the serenity to the actual drinking of the water, it's a very important thing. Now, why am I showing you this slide? This is a case in point where Michelangelo saw that, the tension in a mural, and this is from the Sistine Chapel, a mural I think we all know. This is God giving life to Adam and Adam hasn't received life yet. It's the moment just before, it's the anticipation. And that's what Stanton MacDonald-Wright has given us here, the moment just before everybody's going to meet. And his view of history, in a nutshell, was that as it evolves, you have the yin and the yang, you have these different things that are in the world, but it's a Western notion to think that things are separated. Everything is really connected. Everything is really part of one thing. And you see here this serene face with the lips, the small detail of the nostril, and the very subtle detail of the eye here closed very reverentially is a subtle but beautiful way to do the eye. What Stanton is saying in this healthful mural with fabulous color and the great landscape and heroic figures is that Southern California is a land of great resources and heroic people, and that the civilization will advance best together, not separately. That's his view of this. And that's what he's saying in the Santa Monica City Hall mural. My first wedding license is in that building. So thank you, those of you who have tuned in and listened to this bit, and thank you.
Will, thank you so much. That was absolutely exciting and provocative and wonderful, wonderful insights into the artist. And we really appreciate all that you have brought to this. So our next speaker is Kim Morales-Johnson, who holds a number of distinguished positions representing the Gabrielino Tongva San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians. She and her family have been active in Native American politics and culture and have been featured in documentaries and several books. She serves as vice president of the Gabrielino Tongva Springs Foundation. She's very active as a consultant and is simultaneously a Ph.D. student in Native American Studies at UC Davis. She also enjoys traditional basket weaving, preparing Native foods, and keeping her Native American culture alive. Welcome, Kim. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Good afternoon, and thank you for listening to me, and thank you for inviting me and having my voice in part of this. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I'm going to go here. Before I get started, I just want to take a moment to thank all of the wonderful people who came before me, who taught and mentored me along the way. There's been many, and I just want to take a moment to thank them all, because it's because of their work that I am where I am today. I also want to take a moment to say that I will be presenting a brief overall Tongva history only, because I believe it is important that we remember who was here. And we always, as people, work with the indigenous people of the land that we're occupying. This is a map of the Gabrielino Tongva traditional territory. As you can see from the map, we went up to about Malibu, down along the coast to about Laguna Beach or Aliso Creek, and inland to Riverside. We also occupied the 4 southernmost Channel Islands. This is a wonderful painting named Wiyot's Children by Mary Leighton Thompson. This painting shows our people along the Gabrielino Indian village of Saagna, or today what we know as Playa Vista. As you can see, the waterway with our traditional huts called a quiche. Some children are nearby playing, and some men are in a small canoe. From all historical accounts, this or archaeological or written, we know that we were the original people of Los Angeles, Orange County, and the Channel Islands. The name Tongva was first recorded by a Gabrielino Tongva woman named Narcissia Rosemeyer, who lived up at the Fort Tejon Ranch. It literally translates to people of the earth. Our traditions teach us we literally rose out of the ground and that we are connected to Mother Earth. Native people are very place-centered. That's why our creation stories are very important to us. Creator put Native people on that specific piece of land for a purpose, a reason, and we are to take care of that land. We know how to live in harmony with the land that Creator gave us. So for thousands of years, we lived in harmony. And the natural world was not only our grocery store and pharmacy, but it was also our church and our school. And that's how we lived our lives. In Santa Monica, we have the very last intact Gabrielino Tongva sacred site, Cutavangna Springs. Cutavangna roughly translates to place under the sun. Santa Monica was one of the largest villages for the Gabrielino Tongva people. You all live in Santa Monica, so I'm sure you understand why our people would want to live there. Our tribal elder, Angie Dorame Barons, and her family have been fortunate enough to live and remain in Santa Monica for generations. She has shared with me on many occasions that her father did not want to leave the area because they had always been there. So many of us have followed our family's footsteps, and my family has stayed and remained in San Gabriel and was close to the mission. As many of you probably know, San Gabriel was a city 9 years before Los Angeles was a city. My family stayed near the mission for many reasons. As an adult, studying for my Ph.D. in Native American Studies, I know the history of the missions and the presidios quite well. I'm not quite sure why my family stayed and participated in the mission playhouse or why my grandfather worked there, but we have documents and pictures to show that they did. And we still have many tribal members who live and work in the San Gabriel Valley and area. We know the missions were brought here by the Spanish Crown, and it was not pleasant. The purpose of the missions was to convert the natives to Catholicism. And when many natives did not convert, the Spanish brought the presidios with more military. Today, we know the California missions were built by the Native American slave laborers. We also know that only about 1% of Native Americans survived the genocide in California. And I'm happy and proud to come from a long line of survivors. After the missions were the ranchos. Santa Monica was at one time part of a very large land grant. I believe it was Rancho Palos Verdes or Rancho de Boca Santa Monica. And we still have the city of Palos Verdes as a remnant of that past. We still have remnants of our language all over Los Angeles County. If you think about Topanga Canyon, Cahuenga, Rancho Cucamonga, all of those are Tongva words or derived from Tongva words. So going forward in history, in 1850, California became a state. And in 1852, Hugo Reed, an amateur or self-proclaimed anthropologist, wrote letters regarding the Native Americans within Los Angeles County. We don't know why he wrote the letters. However, it is speculated he wanted to be known as some sort of authority on the Indians of Los Angeles. That same year, in 1852, the governor of California, his name was Bidwell, issued a bounty on the heads of Native Americans. It paid roughly about $17.50 for each dead Native person. It has taken us over 150 years to get past some of this. I don't want to end this on a negative note. I'm thankful that in 2019, Governor Newsom issued an apology to Native Americans for the atrocities like the bounties, like the slavery, like the genocide that happened to our people. In October of 2021, Mayor Garcetti also apologized. He specifically apologized for the slave trade market that was happening in downtown Los Angeles and for the illegal purchase of water from the Owens Valley, which has destroyed much of the Paiute and Western Shoshone traditional lands and culture. There are many books about this. We continue to fight for our protected sites, to keep our culture and preserve as much as we can, even though we're under constant threat of development. As you can see from our history, it's filled with tragedy, but today is a new day, and we have an opportunity to accurately include Native voices accurate information and perspective on the way we tell history and the information that we share. This is a responsibility I don't take lightly. I appreciate the time to speak with you, encourage the truth in telling the history, and moving forward with an inclusive voice with the Indigenous perspective. Oish Kane, may it be well with you, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. You've given us so many insights and so much important information, and we are very grateful that you're part of the process of continuing to think about how we convey this important history in our community. Our third speaker is, let me get my notes here, sorry. Sharon Reyes, who is the great-great-granddaughter of Francisco Marquez and Maria Valenzuela of the 1839 Mexican land grant, Rancho Boca de Santa Monica. Her ancestor's name, Isidro Reyes, is on the mural wall and was also the name of her father. There are actually 4 with that name, but her father was one of them. Sharon researches and preserves archival material on her family history. With other land grant descendants, she was instrumental in preserving the Marquez family cemetery in Santa Monica Canyon. Thank you, Sharon, for sharing with us, and we look forward to your talk.
Good evening. My name is Sharon Reyes, and I am a descendant of Rancho Boca de Santa Monica, Reyes families and Marquez families, founded in 1839. We were here after the native people. I'm very fortunate to be close to my Boca family, and we are all proud of our history. We have strong roots going back to the early 1800s. The Boca family raised cattle, hay, and crops. They had many hardships, but always took care of one another. When my father, Isidro Reyes IV, spoke about his family's history to service clubs, schools, and family fiestas, people would ask him, "Who wants to hear about the past?" And he would say, "We need to know where we've been before we know where we are going." My father, Isidro Reyes IV, attended University High School. When he graduated in 1928, he wrote in his yearbook, "The Story of the Springs." This document still hangs in the Tongva Cultural Center. Thanks to Angie Barron, who watched over the springs for many years, allowed our Boca family members to gather often for family reunions. Angie herself grew up in the canyon and was always proud to tell me stories of how wonderful it was and the relationship that she had with my father. I'm going to pass along a story that my aunt, Hermanita Reyes, would tell from her mother and grandmother about how the native people lived with them in the canyon, how they gathered seeds and acorns, fish and berries. They had rafts made out of waterproof tulle and they would watch them leave to travel to Catalina Island. The nearest neighbors of the Reyes and Marquez families were the native people. They would travel with the Rancho families to the plaza in Los Angeles and walk in front of the carretas and the long sticks. They had long sticks to keep the cattle off the road. Villages worked in harmony together on the rancho. The legend of the spring was also told to me throughout my life by many family members. It was most likely taken from the diary of Father Crespi in 1769. It was along the Indian Trail, El Camino de los Indios, later called the La Brea Trail, or as we know it today, as the La Brea Tar Pits. Soldiers led by Don Gaspar de Portola Ocean in 1769. It was told to me about the hills and the large mountains and the treacherous coast and surf looking out to what today is Point Doom. As Portola and the soldiers meditated upon these hardships, Father Crespi walked alone and looking off out to what is now Santa Monica. As he walked, his eyes suddenly beheld a remarkable sight. There before him, glistening in the midday glow, were two clear pools of water shaped almost like the eyes of a woman. Words came to Father Crespi's lips, and he said, "La Lagrimas de Santa Monica," the tears of Saint Monica's. While upon the springs, he then encountered the native people. The legend has it that this happened on May 4th, 1769, as May 4th was Saint Monica's Day in the religious calendar. I have some pictures, historic pictures that I would like to share of the canyon. The first one is absolutely my favorite. It is showing that the view from the 7th Street Hill, looking down into the canyon of Santa Monica, and above is the Palisades, Pacific Palisades. To the left, if you look over, there's a few houses you can see, and those are on Adelaide Avenue, and they're an historic home marked. Next slide. This is a beautiful picture of the coast of Santa Monica, looking from probably where the incline is. And as you can see, it was very rugged and treacherous, as possibly the expedition. Next slide. Next slide. This is another beautiful picture. It also shows how our family let a lot of people come in the summer and stay in tents right at the mouth of where Chautauqua is. This is a picture of Isidro Reyes II with his mother, Maria Antonia Vila, and his two sisters, Margarita and Francisca. He was the first born Reyes II on 7th Street in Adelaide in the adobe. The adobe, which was torn down in 1906. This is when Isidro Reyes II was born, and that is my Aunt Hermanita Reyes's father. Here's another beautiful, beautiful picture of the bluffs, which, as we all know, were donated by Arcadia Bandini for the people of Santa Monica. And there was a picture of a fence that was actually built by Isidro Garcia, one of our relatives. And some of the old pictures of Santa Monica show those painstakingly fence that he put together from the trees that were torn down on Wilshire Boulevard. Here is a picture of Isidro Reyes III sitting in the wagon, and his brother who's petting the dog is Frank Reyes, his brother, and he raised whippets on in the canyon, and this is their life every day, working, cutting hay, raising the cattle. And I wanted to bring this picture to light because this is the rock at Marcus Knolls in the Pacific Palisades. And these are the descendants from 1952 of the Marcus family. They were very proud that somebody was recognizing them. This is a picture of the cemetery, which is located on San Lorenzo in Santa Monica Canyon. And on the top there is the 7th Street Hill coming off of Adelaide and coming down to the canyon. This to me is before all the development started. It's one of my favorite pictures. And this picture shows it taken around 1930, I believe. And this was where our family had our fiestas under the sycamore trees. And we welcomed anybody who wanted to use the land for parties. And this is actually a huge Japanese wedding picture. And the Japanese families lived right at the mouth of the canyon and had fishing villages there. So we were very close to the Japanese residents. Here is another picture of the rock, the first house of Isidro Reyes I, and that is located on Chua and Summit in the Pacific Palisades. And the Palisades Historical Society decided to honor the Marcus family at Marcus Knolls and the Reyes family at Chautauqua and Sunset. And my Aunt Hermanita is standing right near the rock. And my dad is in the white suit next to the rock on the right. And I wanted to just show how beautiful the statue of St. Monica's is at the end of Wilshire and Ocean Avenue. And I took this picture the other night after it rained, and I always enjoy just standing in the sunshine and at sunset. She is very important to our city. Oh. And in closing tonight, I want to apologize to my family members that I was unable to read all the things that I wrote from my heart regarding tonight's topic. Unfortunately, I was unable to do that as the Conservancy requested it was not the right time. Someday, maybe I'll be able to say what I need to say, but until then, if they choose to cover our mural in City Hall with our family name, Boca de Santa Monica, and the names above the front entrance of the door, Alvarado, Machado, Isidro Reyes, and Francisco Marcus, it will hurt all of us. And it will hurt that people will never know our history and family name, nor the legend story. But that to me is a great loss to future generations and the citizens who reside in the town called Santa Monica. In closing, I was requested to read this beautiful poem that Leo Carrillo wrote before his death. He published a book, The California I Love. and it tells about the end of the Rancho era. And it's called The Footprints of the Padres. In the footprints of the Padres, before the gringo came, in the days of the old mission, in the days of Spanish fame, when those dear old Spanish families ruled the Golden State, what a different California at that very early date. The blackened senoritas and the caballeros too. And the sun-baked old adobe were never known to you. Where are those old families of the early yesterday? Listen, mi amigo, to what I've got to say. There were the Picos, the Carrillos, the Machados, with their many leagues of land, Dominguez de la Guerra, Sepulvedas, and others. And they lived here side by side with the peacefulness of brothers. They trusted one another, much different than now. And they did a lot of thinking to avoid most any row. Then you came, amigo mia, and now you saw the land we got. Wrote back to your mother, and your mother told your dad. They packed the many things they had and shipped them wagon freight. Then you crowded all around us. Inch by inch, you hemmed us in, till we're scarcely room to breathe in. It really seemed a sin. Then you took away our ranchos. They were given us by Spain, and you took our senoritas. See, the answer is quite plain. Now the children of the daughters, where granddad's blood was Latin, are scattered from Point Loma clear back to Manhattan. It's just a simple story from your amigo in the West. I couldn't help telling you just to get it off my chest. Damn Yankees. Thank you. Thank you, Ruth Ann.
Thank you so much, Sharon. I thank you for reading that poem, which I think is so eloquent, and you had so much interesting material to share with us at the beginning. We're really at the beginning of exploring the murals and what is going to develop in terms of new interpretive materials. So this is a really wonderful beginning. I can't thank our speakers enough for all their wonderful new information that they are sharing with us tonight. So before we get to our Q&A, I just wanted to make a few concluding remarks. And so I'll just have another picture to share with you. So I want to return to the point that Will South made about the springs being such an important image, the springs that burst forth in great plenitude from the rocks and the elevated plateau, which we know is behind Uni High. And it courses downward through the center of the mural. Does the water stop there? Let's step outside. We see a fountain emerging from the entry door, bubbling like the springs. It flows from here in a continuous course across the street into Tongva Park, meandering through the park in different configurations until you can see the ocean. The designer of these landscapes, Ken Genser Square in Tongva Park, was James Corner, principal of field operations, renowned for the High Line in New York City. I was on the Landmarks Commission at that time, and I heard him emphasize the importance of water as a unifying theme of his landscape, seen to emerge from City Hall and flowing in a continuous stream onward until we get to the ocean. Speaking of continuity, brings us back to Coroavunga Springs as a place being so important to their culture. In recent years, Gabrielino Tongva history and culture has been revived and celebrated, thanks to the pride, activism, and hard work of the indigenous descendants. The Sacred Springs is being restored as an important cultural heritage site behind University High School. Bob Ramirez, current president of the Coroavunga Springs Foundation, is providing energetic and effective leadership in caring for the springs, planting native plants, building a replica Tongva house, and bringing people together. Their story is one of survival of centuries of cultural eradication and revival of their cultural traditions. The site is open for work parties the first Saturday of the month, and visitors are welcome. The entry is off Barrington between Texas and Ohio Avenues behind the high school. I strongly recommend a visit to this very meaningful and important place. Now I will introduce Libby Motika, who is on the Conservancy's program committee, and she will handle the Q&A. Thanks, Libby. Hi.
Thanks, Roseanne. Well, we have some questions, which is good. And I will go through some that I think are pertinent to the group. There's just one: what do you make of the dark V-shaped break in Father Crespi's walking stick? It doesn't look as if he's going to get much further leaning on that fractured cane. Could it be symbolic? If so, what interpretation might be intended? I guess Will, take it away.
Is that question for me then?
Let's have you answer that question.
Okay, well, I have to just be honest and say that I do not know. I do not know. I mean, it's an interesting thing to have been observed, though. I want to say that to whoever saw this, in all seriousness, good observation. I mean, you're looking very carefully and very closely. I'm impressed. I'll think about this, actually, because I don't have an answer and I don't want to pretend that I do.
Well, let's stick with you for a minute, Will. There's another one that has to do with the details of the mural and possibly interpretation.
Okay.
And that is, has anyone ever analyzed the history mural from the perspective that the friar's foot moving forward is symbolic of feet washing, as Jesus did for the poor?
I had no idea I was going to have such an intensely educated crowd tonight. No, not to my knowledge. No one has put that forward, but I love it. Stanton MacDonald-Wright takes these seemingly small details and often uses them again as visual clues, visual double entendre. And so to notice something like that is right on the money in terms of how do we understand Stanton MacDonald-Wright. Because of the bare foot as it approaches the water, absolutely the idea of the cleansing, because you need to be cleansed. You know, there's a reason for that. And there's another idea about the interaction between an image and a viewer. And that is this: if you as the viewer see that, then you have been moved to think that. And the artist cannot control that. People are going to think a lot of things about the mural that the artist did not intend, and some things that he did intend. The bottom line is that whatever an artist intends is tough luck, because once you put the mural up, it's how people think of it when they come to it. And I think that particular observation is meaningful. It resonates with me, the cleansing of the feet. And if you are a professional, write that article.
Right. Thanks, Will. This is addressed to Kim and Sharon. This questioner wants to know, to have you think about the imagery of the figures on the mural. Sharon, you want to take a stab at that? Do you want me to repeat the question? Turn off your mute, Sharon.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry,
sure,
you broke up a little bit.
I would like to hear what Kim Johnson and Sharon Reyes think about the imagery of the figures on the mural.
Oh, I think they're beautiful. I've seen them since I was 6 years old. It's, to me, I never saw anything about it, or, you know, a beauty story. It's a story of our city, and I just love it. It's beautiful.
I guess that's what
And I
happens.
go there constantly to see.
Yeah. Kim, you want to comment on the figures?
Sure. This is what I've shared with Ruth Ann and other meetings. That picture symbolizes something to Native people that maybe we don't want to remember, because that's the moment of contact. So if you go back to my PowerPoint of beautiful landscape, living in our traditions and in harmony with Mother Earth, that moment when the Spaniards came changed our history completely. And so I don't really see, now that we know more and we're uncovering more, I could see it in being included in the larger Tongva story, but that is just one moment in time that personally I would not want to celebrate. But there are people within the tribe that I don't want to speak for that I know they're okay with it. So I don't speak for everyone, I only speak for myself.
Don't go away. There's another one for you, Kim.
Sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about the work of the Gabriel Tongva Foundation? The mission, some of the projects, activities that you engage in?
Well, there's multiple things. The San Gabriel Band of Mission Indians has held tribal council within San Gabriel for over 200 years. So we've been there, we're pretty well documented, you know, between pictures and just different various artifacts and documents. But we also live, you know, in a contemporary world like you all do. And so I also serve on the Los Angeles City County Native American Indian Commission, trying to get, Los Angeles has the most dense populated area of Native Americans. So trying to get people services and that type of work. And then the Gabrielino Tongva Springs Foundation is really about the education and preservation of the springs. And so to have a voice on that, and you know, we work a lot with UCLA and other institutions just to keep that preservation. I think that more institutions are realizing, you know, that our voice needs to be heard, and we kind of got covered up. If you think about, you know, the tribe stayed where it was, and then Los Angeles got built up around it, but we didn't necessarily move. We just kind of got diminished and maybe in some cases erased. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think that one of our passions, and even at the Springs Foundation, is to tell our story from our perspective. And that's what a lot of institutions and whatnot are doing, because instead of writing about the people or painting about the people, work with the people, by, for, and with the people.
Does that include participation in school curricula?
Yes, I have participated. I was a teacher prior to going to school up in Davis. And so I've worked with LAUSD, and I've worked with Houghton Mifflin on different, their history book, 4th grade history books. So yeah, we're continuing to do the work. And I think the biggest educational piece and takeaway is that we are still here, and we don't need to be referred to as we were once here, because we are still here.
Thank you. Back to you, Will. There's a question about Stanton MacDonald-Wright's commentary about his work. Did he often have texts that kind of explain what his thoughts were?
Yes and no. I mean, he was a prolific artist. I mean, he painted, he sketched, he made prints, he wrote theater, he wrote books, he wrote poetry. And so there isn't commentary on everything he did. The most commentary, and so thank you for the question, is he actually wrote a catalog on the library mural for the Santa Monica library mural. So every panel told a very specific story. And whether the scientific advancements, who this figure was and what they did. And on the artistic side, who Beethoven was, who Lao Tzu was, and what their contributions were. And I don't have to guess in that case, and nor does anybody else, what his intentions were, was to suggest that, listen, everything needs to ultimately come together to be at its best. And sadly, he didn't write that much about this particular mural, and it could be because that he thought it was the telling of this particular story, and that the way he did it with the emphasis on heroism and the big picture view, this epic view, for him suggested positivity. It's important to remember with Stanton as the director of the Federal Art Project during the Depression, when things were so terrible and so many people were down on their luck and so many people were starving. And it was clear that, you know, a lot of the world was going to war at the very time he was working on this. There was this desire to put, you know, your best foot forward as a city and as a country. And it would not be out of bounds to say that from a certain point of view, these murals were propagandistic in their own way, in that this is such a great place, nothing is wrong. And of course, he knew that there were problems, and everybody knew that there were problems, but we're not going to put the big problems on the wall. We're going to emphasize the positive, and that is that our land is beautiful, our people are heroic. Again, I think of the Native American figure with the open palms and the downcast eyes and the meditative view. To me, it's rich in poetic sentiment that this is a positive, healthful, forward-looking place. And yeah.
Thank you.
I just keep going, so you cut me off.
All right, I'm going to talk. No, more from you. Ruth Ann, this is for you. I'm not clear what changes people want to the mural. Do they want it removed? Do they want it covered, modified?
So what is going on is a proposal to cover the murals with a semi-transparent screen that can be opened up so that you can actually see them partially when the screens are open. So it's sort of a kind of metaphorical impediment in a sense. It is intended to be temporary because the recontextualization discussions, which are really very intense layers of community meetings and involvement and hearing from a lot of people, is to be resolved with new interpretation for the murals that gives additional explanation for what their meanings are in the community, as well as new works of art, commissioning Indigenous artists to create meaningful interpretations of their cultural story. Tongva Park has nothing in it that conveys anything about Tongva history or culture. So there are lots of opportunities for that. So that's the direction. So while that recontextualization is going on, the screens are supposed to be up, but then they're supposed to come down at some point when that process is fully complete. I would estimate the screens would be up for a few years. They're very big. They cut up the space of City Hall. They're expensive. They're $50,000 that could be spent in maybe more positive ways to bring in new art and new interpretation, but there it is. So that's the moment we're in now.
Thank you, thank you. I'm reviewing all the questions. I think I may have come to the end. Let me just see. Some of them are redundant. One last one for you, Will. Where did McDonald-Wright live during this period when he directed the FAP for Southern California?
He lived in Santa Monica.
And
he lived in Santa Monica, and I'd give you his address, but I'm not going to. Okay. So, I mean, that house is still there.
Okay.
And I want to just editorialize just the briefest bit. He loved Santa Monica, and he could have lived anywhere. And toward the end of his life, he lived half of each year in Japan. He was a success at that point, and he could live wherever, but he never left California. And many of you know who are listening that he taught for years at UCLA, and he published articles and wrote books and was an irascible old man and a difficult person at times, but he lived a life steeped in art. And he would be the first one to say that a mural is not a book. You know, a book is something that if you don't want to read it, you don't have to. But if you live in a city, a mural is in your face. You can't help but see it.
Yeah.
So they are different. They're two different things, just like the Statue of Liberty. You can't help but see it. And he would encourage this discussion that is happening now. And he would say, okay, good. You know, work it out, because a mural is in a public space. and it has to be something that works for the public. He felt it did at the time it was made. And as we know now, we're in a different time. And Kimberly has pointed that out eloquently, Kimberly, I think. And Stanton would be with us in saying, let's talk about it. Let's see if we can find a way forward that works for everybody.
Well, I think that's a wonderful moment to thank you and to take this back to Ruth Ann, who would like to say some concluding remarks. Thank you, everyone, for these wonderful questions out there in the universe.
Yeah, I would just like to thank our speakers so much for their insights and their interest and the time they've given. It's a very illuminating afternoon to spend with all of you and hearing everything you had to say. So I'm going to turn it back to Carol, who will then conclude the session. I will note that the session is being recorded, will be on our website. In addition, those who want to participate in future public engagement discussions about the murals will be invited to do so on our website as soon as we have that information. Carol?
Thank you, Ruth Ann. And I would like to add our thanks to you, to Will, to Kim, and Sharon and Libby for the program as the visible parts of the program, but also Adinas, Steve Loper, and the members of the program and advocacy committees who worked to behind the scenes, essentially, in putting this in place. We hope that you found this informative, as we recognize that these murals are seen as very controversial by many in our community. And we want to make sure, as Ruth Ann just did, that you know that City Cultural Affairs is embarking on a community effort to explore how the murals might be contextualized in a way that acknowledges the past inequities, but makes a strong commitment to a just future. They will be holding a kickoff meeting in March. As Ruth Ann said, we'll put it on our website, and we will be making sure that you are sending email to make sure that you are aware that that discussion is taking place. If you are interested in our past Mosaic programs, they are archived on the website. If you go to it, which is www.smconservancy.org, there is a panel across the top, and if you look at events and so on, you will see there's an archive of all 6 of our previous programs from the last 2 years. You can also see there how you can support the Conservancy's work by making a donation, by joining, or in fact, by volunteering. Again, I'd like to thank you all for joining us in this effort, as well as our panel participants, and wish you a wonderful evening to come. Thank you.